Hello, Verge. So I'm here for the same reason you are, and it's that we have a climate crisis. Oops, we go back one slide. A little too excited. I'm here for the same reason you are, and that's because we have an emissions crisis, and like you, I want to find out how to solve it. And the fact is, we have released far too many greenhouse gases into our atmosphere like it's a free and open sewer. And the fact is, more than 50% of that has happened in the past 30 years, since 1990. When you look and tap into the scientists, the best out there from the UN and the IPCC, they say that we have a carbon budget. And so to date, we've emitted 2 trillion 380 billion tons into the atmosphere of greenhouse gases. And what that's done is it's led to the 1.1 degrees of warming that we experience today. And if we emit 400 more gigatons, well, we get to that 1.5 degree target that we all keep talking about. We emit more, it'll be 1.7. We emit more, it'll be 2. When you look at the budget that we have of the 400 gigatons, and if we emit 59 billion tons a year today, we blow through that budget in the next 10 years. And with the current pace of emissions, as well as the policies that we have, it's very likely we're going to end up at this 3-degree world. So, what is the plan? How do we as a society go from 59 billion tons of emissions each year down to 0? Together with John Doerr, the acclaimed venture capitalist, pioneering clean tech venture capitalist, we set out to try to answer that question. What's the plan? And so we tapped into the brains of 100 different experts, activists, policymakers, scientists, entrepreneurs, investors, and innovators, and we came up with the Speed and Scale plan. And it's based on objectives and key results, OKRs. How many people in this room know what OKRs are? Yes, you know you're in Silicon Valley when that number is very high. And so we've got ourselves 10 objectives, and we've paired them with 3 to 5 key results, all time-bound, all measurable, the measures that we have to change to get to net zero. And so let me go through them to show you how we get to 0. First, we've got to electrify transportation. And what we have to do there is switch to electric vehicles, get rid of gas and diesel. We have to then decarbonize the grid, really ending coal. We need to tap into more solar, wind, nuclear, and other forms of storage. We've got to fix food, and the piece there isn't to be vegan, it really is to eat less beef, lamb, and cheese. You do that, we cut down emissions by a ton. We've got to also compost, waste less, and treat our soil with a lot more respect. We then have to protect nature, quite simply ending deforestation, as well as protecting our oceans and peatlands and grasslands. We've got to clean up industry. Concrete and steel are really hard. And then we've got to remove that stubborn carbon that's left over. We do these 6 objectives, we will go from 59 to 0. But we've got to do it quicker, right? To beat that budget, we've got to cut emissions in half by the end of this decade and get to 0 by 2050. So we're going to lean on 4 accelerants, things that you and I and everyone in this room control. We've got to win the politics and policy, so making bold commitments and following through with legislation, like the Inflation Reduction Act here in the US. We've got to turn movements into action. That's everywhere from the ballot box to the boardroom. We've got to innovate, which is really driving down the cost of clean energy and technologies. And then we have to invest in R&D, in venture capital, in project finance, and philanthropy. We do these 4 accelerants, it's pretty sure that this transition is going to happen faster. We launched a website called speedandscale.com that looks at each and every one of those key results and tracks our progress on them. And so we color them, right? Blue for being achieved, green for meaning strong momentum, yellow if it's limited progress, orange if it's off track, or red if it means code red. And when you look for the positive news, right, the things that are blue and green, what you see is this acceleration of EV adoption. You see the cost of solar and wind dropping. You see that we deployed over $57 billion into venture capital last year. All of the really positive things. But when you drill in on the code red, and code red are the things that are off track, that are in the gigaton range, you see that we have a lot of work to do. We've got to stop these coal plants from burning. We've got to stop methane leaks. We've got to shorten, consume less beef. We've got to end deforestation. And as you can see, there's a lot of work still to do on steel, concrete, and the materials that we use. There's also a handful of other key results that fall into the code red category. And so, quick question. How many people in this room work at a Fortune Global 500 company? Let me see, raise of hands. How many people now buy from a Fortune Global 500 company? Which is all of us here. And so I'm going to drill into a key result that actually everyone in this room can help shape. Key result 8.3. This key result here is about businesses. It's the commitments we make. And this key result is tracking that 100% of the global Fortune 500 has a clear net zero goal by 2040. And like for all of you who said OKRs, if you craft a key result, you've got to go and measure it. And so with my colleagues, Quinn, Jonathan, and Julian, and myself, we went to all 500 of your websites and looked at those PDFs, looked at the ESG reports to see what commitments were being made. And what we found is just 2.8% had a clear net zero goal for 2040, and only 5% had it for 2050. That means less than 30 companies have a clear net zero goal. And you're going to say, but Ryan, we all have commitments. We have these websites. I've seen them. And the truth is about 50% of companies in the Fortune 500 have a commitment. But when you dig into what it means to be Scope 3, well, some companies just don't include it. Other companies have also redefined what Scope 3 counts as. You see some companies that have a carbon commitment, but leave out methane, leave out the industrial gases. And then when you talk about net zero, you don't specify how you intend on using carbon removal. And so if I leave you with one thing here today, is that if we set bold and ambitious and clear goals, that's how we can have, as an industry, the fastest way we can get to net zero. So bold and clear goals. So how do you set a clear net zero goal? Well, first, it's covering all three scopes, 1, 2, 3. It's then covering all greenhouse gases, not just carbon, methane, nitrous oxide, and all the industrial gases. It's committing to use removal. When you look at the IPCC definition, that's what it says. To be a net zero commitment, that's what it has to be. And then you got to set a date, 2050, 2040, or like ambitious colleagues around 2030. And what you do is on your website, you have just very clear language. I mean, we poured through the 150-page PDFs, and all we were looking for these sets of words. It's that we are committing to a net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2040 across scopes 1, 2, 3. And then somewhere else saying, and to achieve net zero, we're committed to removing our excess emissions through carbon removal. So the road to net zero is going to be really hard. But with clear goals, every employee, every supplier, and every customer knows exactly where we're headed. And that's really critical. We need to show people where we're going. And so this transition is going to be one of the the largest economic transformation of our lifetimes. Like John Doerr says, the economic opportunity here will be bigger than the internet. And so it's also the imperative of our lifetime. So the playbook is simple. It's that we've got to commit to an aggressive goal, a clear net zero goal. We then have to do everything we can in our power to cut our emissions, right? Picking the cleaner, greener alternative. We then have to invest in energy efficiency to make better use of the energy we have. And then we have to remove what's left. I would walk off right now, but I'm forgetting to say one of the magic words that we like to use often to try to solve a lot of our problems, and that's offsets. So, Ryan, what about offsets? Well, the truth is, if we have to lean on removal, today, the carbon removal market for both engineered and nature-based is very expensive and there's not enough supply. And so if we want that market to exist when we have our 2040 and 50 goals, we have to catalyze that market. And so what we have to do there, and actually before I do that, how many people in this audience actually buy carbon removal as an organization? This is good to see, a few hands. And so I know for a lot of folks, you're wondering, well, how much am I supposed to buy? How can I be a carbon catalyst? And one of the recommendations we have is start by buying at least 0.1% of your emissions as carbon removal. And when you start there, you can see that market going. But then, Ryan, what about the other kinds of offsets? The avoidance, the reduction, the protection ones? Definitionally, by the way, those are things like funding solar projects, cleaner coal, cooking stoves, and protecting forests. While those definitionally don't work towards your net zero math for your company, they're so important for the world and our world's net zero goals. And so the message there is, well, what we have to do here is buy the highest quality reduction and protection offsets so we can neutralize our emissions on our march to net zero. So what do we do about offsets? We've got to do both. We've got to catalyze this removal market as well as neutralizing our emissions as we get there, right? Neutralizing to net zero. So back to that one thing. The one thing that we can do, maybe at the end of this week or even after this set of keynotes, is take a look at what your climate commitment is. Does it include all scopes? Is it across all GHGs? And do we define how we're going to tackle getting to net zero at the end using removals? Setting a clear one, if you need help, feel free to reach out. But the message I'll leave with is, if we have great goals, we can save the planet. Thank you.